My name is Terry Kalb. I taught for BOCES, Eastern Suffolk BOCES, for over 30 years. I retired in 2012, knowing what was coming. That's not the reason I retired per se. There were other reasons as well. My leaving allowed two younger tenured teachers to keep their jobs, and I have. And after a number of months at home, doing things retired people do when they don't feel the pull of anger at the destruction of a profession that they loved, I started to get phone calls from parents saying that something was wrong, that they're seeing a change. These were parents of children with disabilities. Their placement that the child was functioning very well in, all of a sudden they could no longer handle the general education class because the pace of the class was too quick for the children. The content was too dense. They weren't able to master one skill before they had to rush on to the next one. This was happening for typical children, so you could only imagine for children that were struggling before the Common Core, before Engage New York modules, what this did for children who have difficulties. Special education law going back to the early 1980s was federal law. The federal government stepped in to protect children who were not getting an appropriate education because of a disability, and said that you as a child with a disability, you are entitled to a free, appropriate public education. What's happening now may be free, but it's not appropriate.
Exactly.
It also said that you are entitled to an individual educational program based on how the child is functioning, how the student is functioning, both their strengths as well as their areas of need. Now what we're being told is that the IEP is a grade level list of grade level expectations, that teachers in special education have to choose from only grade level skills in developing an IEP, and that the child is expected not only to keep pace with their typical developing peers, but in fact they have gaps to close, so they have to learn even faster than typical children. It's a nightmare for children. Children are suffering, children are being harmed, children are getting the sense that they are failures before they have ever learned the foundational skills that they will need to understand everything else in their life. I started working as a child advocate for parents who were convinced that their child's individual needs were not being represented at the table. And there were many different approaches that districts took. Some of the districts were really trying their best to create an IEP that would be meaningful for a child, but were feeling hamstrung by both federal law and state ed guidelines. There were other districts who were essentially saying, your child needs to, suck it up. Your child, this child, we're going to treat everybody the same because that's what civil rights is. Well, I'm sorry, but that's not what civil rights is. Civil rights is equity, it's fairness. It's not treating every child the same. We know children learn differently. Even if you have typically developing children, if you have more than one child, that they don't have the exact same needs. They don't have the same interests, they don't have the same strengths, they don't necessarily have the same areas of development that are slower than others. Children are different. And yet we're saying to teachers, you need to address different learning needs, but we're going to test every kid with the same test. It's absurd. Then we're saying that special education teachers are to blame if we don't cure the disability. Very shortly, it's already happening. there are fewer and fewer teachers, trainees, students who are looking to go into education, who will choose special education. Because if you're going to tie that teacher's rating to the test scores of the most vulnerable, the most needy, the most challenged children, then every teacher, no matter how many years, no matter how experienced you are in looking at diverse needs and reaching and teaching children in the ways that, different ways that they need to be taught, you're going to find yourself 2 years out of a job. And from what we're reading, it could be that you get 90 days notice that you no longer have a career. You could have been teaching, special education students for 23 years, and you will be told, "Whoop, you're out, 90 days, pack it up." It'll be a revolving door, and we will not get replacements for these teachers. We will not get people to come in. We will have a revolving door with inexperienced substitutes teaching children with very, very challenging learning needs. So I don't usually do this, but I got a letter from a parent, and I would like to just have you keep in mind Katharina when you think about, should I opt my child out? Should I refuse for my child? Because maybe you have a child that actually, likes a challenging test. Maybe you have a child that might feel a little uncomfortable if not everybody is refusing to take the test in the class and they don't want to call attention to themselves. I want you to think about Katharina. Katharina fought like hell to survive and be here. She survived a stroke before she was born. She has mild cerebral palsy, vision issues, cognitive delays, and speech delays. Catherine has succeeded in ways none of us imagined when she was first diagnosed as a massive stroke survivor. But before you discount her as someone not worthy of a normal education, let me tell you about her. Kath is beginning to understand that for her, life will always mean that she'll need to work harder and be smarter. She knows that learning her math facts means spending 5 times or more longer than the other kids. She knows she might not get through all the stations in physical education class or have the time to complete an art project or finish reading a library book in the given week of borrowed time. She knows she wants to play an instrument when she gets to 5th grade. Besides the piano, she already takes weekly lessons on with a wonderfully patient teacher. She knows when we sit to do homework together each night, it will probably take her 2 hours to do the work she missed during her different therapies in the school day, as well as the normal homework. However, what I fear now for my amazing daughter, as well as for my other daughter, my students, and my husband's inner city students, is a one-size-fits-all education model which does not work for the various abilities and strengths of real-life children. Children behind the data. The idea behind making sure that each student has an equal opportunity at a solid education is a noble one. The idea of testing and forcing each child to gallop through the curriculum regardless of how they learn is devastating to our children. Tying student scores to the effectiveness of the teacher is insane. Teachers are not quality control agents inspecting each product and passing them along or rejecting them. My beautiful, courageous, smart, caring daughter struggles to take these tests, especially time tests. She shuts down and cries when we try to practice at home. Her confidence level is fragile, and this education reform of standardized one-size-fits-all is chipping away at her and other students who teeter in your data margins. I love that phrase. The idea that next year she will be asked to have hours of test prep instead of furthering her love of learning, her curiosity, her math facts, her reading, her love of cultures is frightening. The fact that with her disability, she will be permitted extra time, longer time for this insanity, time which will be taken away from the learning she really needs and wants, means that my daughter will not have a chance to catch up. Indeed, she will never be able to catch up. This education reform that is being pushed through, Governor Cuomo, goes against everything we have found to be research-based. This education you are pushing means that only certain students will be able to get a decent education. The rest will be forced into more academic intervention services, missing more class time, more learning time for prepping for tests that are developmentally unsound and unjust. I never want my daughter or other children who struggle to learn the normal way and at normal speed to believe that they are not good enough or that there isn't enough room at the school tables for them. So thank you, Veronica, for that. What I would like you to think about when you're deciding about your child is that it's not about what's easy for your own child. It's about changing a system that is fundamentally unfair to many, many, many children. And just as in the era of civil rights, since they like to call this a civil rights movement, treating everybody the same, there were children who were allowed to go up and drink at the white water fountain, or not the colored water fountain, as it was called back then. And if your child was privileged enough to drink at the white water fountain, that did not mean that that system was okay or fair. This system is as fundamentally unjust to many, many children, children who are English language learners, children who live in high poverty, children who are schizophrenic, children who have extreme learning needs. This is as fundamentally unfair to them as the Jim Crow system was. And so let's all be the people who say no. The people who say, even if my child is thriving, and I really don't think when you narrow a curriculum that children are thriving. But even if your child is not being harmed in the same way, what lesson do we want to teach our children about the society we want to live in? We take care of the children who are the most vulnerable. We stand up for them, and that's what I'm asking you to do.